I never thought I'd find myself sitting in a courtroom, being called the cold word plaintiff, forced to recount every detail of a life the man across from me was now trying to erase. On the other side of the table sat the man who once promised to love me forever. Nathan. Legs crossed, dressed in a dark blue suit, eyes void of any emotion. He let out a soft chuckle and leaned over to whisper something into the ear of the young woman beside him. She laughed, a short mocking sound that made me clutch the file in my hands tighter, as if it were the last shred of dignity I had left. My name is Isabella. 7 years ago I left my graphic design job at a media firm to help Nathan start a business. Back then he had nothing but an idea and limitless confidence. We rented an old garage and turned it into our first office. I handled everything, designing the logo, building the client list, managing the books and even hand-delivering orders because he was too busy building relationships. But this morning, in court, his lawyer stood, adjusted his collar and began the story as if I were just a shadow living off my ex-husband's success. "Your Honor," he said with pointed emphasis, "Mrs. Isabella had no role in the development of green tech. Financial records show she held no official title, made no financial contributions, and was, in effect, a homemaker." I wanted to speak up, to push back, but before I could finish my first sentence the judge cut me off. "Please answer the question directly, ma'am," he said without even looking at me, eyes still fixed on his iPad. I swallowed the words I'd rehearsed for a week, the things I thought would finally make someone understand. Suddenly felt meaningless. And Nathan? He just sat there leaning back in his chair smirking. When it was his turn he spoke with unbelievable confidence. "I don't want to speak ill of anyone, but the truth is, Isabella didn't run the business, she stayed home. I built everything. Now she just wants a piece, because we're getting divorced." A soft laugh came from behind me, probably one of his new friends. People who used to eat in the kitchen I cooked in, now sitting behind me laughing at my pain. I sat in silence. I knew if I let my emotions show they'd see me differently, the way people often look at women who cry in public. I reminded myself not to be weak, but my heart felt like stone. What Nathan and his lawyer were doing wasn't just denying my work, they were rewriting history, erasing me from the early years filled with sweat and tears. When the court recessed I walked out into the hallway, my heels clicking against the tile, echoing in solitude. Nathan stood nearby, laughing with his lawyer and his new girlfriend, the woman in the designer dress with a glare sharp enough to pierce through me. "She really thinks a few old receipts will change anything?" she said loudly, not bothering to lower her voice. I heard it all, every word. I didn't respond, I just clutched my folder tighter and thought, if the truth isn't enough to make them ashamed, then I'll make sure it can't be forgotten. Not through anger, but through preparation. That night I sat alone in the small rental apartment I'd moved into after leaving the house I had helped pay for. A cold cup of tea in hand, dim kitchen light falling on a table scattered with old invoices, sticky notes and a few faded photos from the early green tech days. Back when its name was just handwritten on a whiteboard. I used to think none of this would matter legally, but now that Nathan was denying my entire existence in the company's journey, I began to see it all differently. One name suddenly came back to me. Claire Robbins. Claire had been a part-time assistant during the early days. She helped me cut labels, send mail, even hand-tag our first product batch. I remembered she had a habit of documenting everything. Receipts, handwritten contracts, internal emails. We were close, but she moved on to a bigger firm and we lost touch. I wasn't sure if she even remembered me, but I knew, if anyone had preserved the truth from those early days, it was her. I found Claire on LinkedIn after nearly 2 hours of digging through old contacts. Her new profile picture was from a tech conference, more polished than before, but the same careful, diligent eyes. I didn't message her right away, instead I wrote an email. I didn't beg, didn't demand, I simply explained that I was trying to prove I wasn't the freeloader Nathan claimed, and that if she still had any materials, especially emails or documents that showed my role, I would be deeply grateful to see them. After I sent the email I waited. Each hour crawled by. Finally, at 11 p.m. I received a reply. "Isabella, I still have everything. Meet me tomorrow afternoon, I think. It's time the truth is told." The next day I drove to a small cafe on the west side of town, just a few buildings from Claire's current workplace. When I walked in she was already seated, a laptop open and a thick folder beside her. I didn't even have time to speak before she stood, pulled out a chair for me and said quietly, "I never thought I'd need these. But he was wrong to think he could erase you." We sat for over 2 hours. Claire handed me printed copies of work emails between me and Nathan, the ones I had typed on the office computer but never saved. There were also old files she had backed up from early budget proposals, listing my responsibilities, sourcing materials, managing orders. Some documents even bore my signature alongside Nathan's on pitch decks sent to early investors. But the most powerful one was a handwritten draft of a company ownership agreement I had completely forgotten about. 35% for me, 65% for Nathan. We both signed it late one night before the company was legally registered. I still remembered Nathan saying, "Let's just write it down for now. We'll do a proper contract later." That later never came. I looked at Claire, my voice shaking. "Why did you keep all of this?" She leaned back and smiled slightly. "Because I admired you, and I couldn't stand seeing you treated like you never existed." I brought everything home, scanned each document onto a separate USB and labeled the folder Living Proof. That night, I didn't sleep, but not because of fear. For the first time during this trial, I felt hope. Nathan may have erased my name from the company's front door, but he couldn't erase me from its past. Because someone had saved it for me. And this time, I wasn't going to let anyone bury it under the label of invisible. Claire advised me to find a lawyer experienced in divorce cases involving disputed business contributions. It took me 3 days to gather myself, list reputable firms in the area, and finally settle on one name that stood out right away: Elaine Porter. Elaine wasn't what I expected. She was a few years younger than me, had softly curled hair, thin-rimmed glasses, and a voice both calm and firm. Her office was in a red crew brick building in downtown Portland, modestly decorated yet precise in every detail. I walked in holding the USB and that thick folder. Everything Claire had given me. "Ms. Isabella, I've read your preliminary case summary," Elaine said as we sat down. "Before we begin, I need to ask, are you ready to go all the way with this?" I didn't hesitate. "I don't want pity. I want the truth recognized." Elaine nodded. Her gaze shifted from cautious to focused, like a warrior stepping into a battlefield already chosen. We spent the first few hours going through every piece of evidence: the emails between Nathan and me, the co-signed budgets, everything Claire had provided, especially one email, dated June 3, 2016, sent by Nathan at midnight, after we'd landed our first big client. "I don't know how you pulled off that inventory mess, but you just saved this company. Without you, Green Tech would probably be under a bridge right now." Elaine read it, paused, and then said softly, "This one sentence is worth more than anything his lawyer could ever say." We began reconstructing a detailed timeline. Every invoice, every old bank transaction, every transfer receipt I had made from my personal account to the company account, in the early days, was categorized by Elaine. She even hired a forensic accountant, Patrick Yoon, a specialist in financial analysis for divorce disputes, to start digging deeper into Green Tech's books. A week later, Patrick sent over his preliminary report. And that's when everything changed. According to the analysis, between 2015 and 2018 there were multiple transactions labeled as external investments or emergency funding, but the source traced back to my own account, not once, 9 times, adding up to nearly $72,000, 0 cents. Money I had withdrawn from my personal savings to keep the company afloat during its toughest years. I used to think, well, what's mine is my husband's too. Turns out, in court, that definition doesn't exist. Elaine reviewed the report and turned to me. "If we can prove that these so-called investments were systematic, and that he deliberately left them out of the divorce filings, this isn't just a property dispute, it's financial concealment." I sat in silence, overwhelmed. A part of me still wanted to believe Nathan was just selfish, not malicious. But numbers don't lie. They tell the truth clearer than any excuse ever could. We began preparing a rebuttal file. Elaine sorted each piece of evidence: thank you notes, work emails, invoices, transfer receipts, and most importantly, the handwritten company ownership agreement. "We need to turn this into a narrative, a clear timeline with matching evidence at each step," Elaine said as she pinned color-coded notes across the whiteboard behind her. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel alone anymore. I learned how to ask the right questions, how to read legal clauses, and what it meant to distinguish between formal titles and real impact in a small business. Elaine didn't treat me like a victim. She treated me as a collaborator with a voice in her own case. One afternoon, while reviewing documents, Elaine chuckled softly. He thought he could wipe you out of everything just by removing your name from official records. But he left the clearest trail in the last place anyone would look. I raised an eyebrow. Elaine pointed at the closing lines of an email Nathan sent me in 2017, during the rushed preparation for a new product launch. I couldn't do this without you. You're the backbone of it all, Isabella. You don't call someone the backbone of a company if they were just sitting at home spending money. I pressed my lips together. Something shifted in me. It wasn't rage. It wasn't triumph. It was a cold, sharp resolve. I would bring the truth into the light. Not for revenge, but so I wouldn't be erased from the story I had helped write with my youth. The second hearing began on a gray Wednesday morning, but the atmosphere in the courtroom was nothing like before. I walked in with Elaine holding an organized binder, shoulders straight and eyes steady. Nathan was already there. He still looked polished, slicked back hair, dark blue suit, but there was something uneasy in his posture. And what I noticed first, his fiancée was no longer with him. The judge reviewed the file Elaine had submitted 3 days prior, containing the thank you email, account statements, the handwritten ownership draft, and Claire's signed statement. He nodded slightly, then asked the plaintiff to begin. Elaine stood, voice calm but firm. Your Honor, we're not here today to debate emotions. We're here to present a complete picture, that my client, Mrs. Isabella Reed, was not just a wife. She was an integral part of GreenTech's operations from day one. No title, but undeniable substance. She displayed the numbered exhibits, each appearing on the large courtroom screen. The email reading, I couldn't do this without you. The transfer receipts, dual-signed proposals, and the 2015 handwritten ownership note. Nathan sat frozen. When Elaine read aloud the June 2016 email where he said, I saved the company, I saw his hand gripping the side of the chair. No more smug smiles, no whispered side comments. Just a tense silence, stretched tight. Nathan's lawyer stood to object, claiming the documents lacked legal weight and could have been fabricated. But the judge didn't dismiss them outright. This court needs time to verify authenticity, he said. If these are valid, they hold considerable weight. Elaine continued. We have also contacted former employees from GreenTech's early days. Individuals who can confirm that Mrs. Reed was more than a homemaker. She coordinated orders, managed vendors, and dealt with operational issues firsthand. A man in his early 40s took the witness stand. Mark Evans, former warehouse ops staff. He wore a plain gray shirt, calloused hands showing years of manual labor. I remember Ms. Isabella clearly, he said. Whenever an order went wrong, she was the one in the warehouse checking boxes. Nathan rarely showed up. We used to call her the shadow boss because, honestly, she was the only one who kept things moving. Next was testimony from Hannah Liu, a former intern who's now a communications director at another firm. She confirmed that I trained her step by step from handling suppliers to customer responses. Their testimonies were like hammers cracking through the shell Nathan's legal team had built. The judge called a 30-minute recess to deliberate and ordered GreenTech to submit internal records from 2015 to 2018. As Nathan left the courtroom, his shoulders slumped, eyes stripped of confidence. He leaned toward his lawyer and whispered something, but I no longer cared. I had told my truth, and for the first time, someone was listening. During the break, Elaine handed me a bottle of water. You're shifting the entire case, Isabella. I shook my head gently. I'm just telling the life I lived. She smiled. Not everyone has the courage to turn memories into evidence, but you did. When court resumed, the judge announced that a broader investigation would be opened to verify the legitimacy of the funds I transferred to the company, including appointing an independent audit to examine questionable transactions. Nathan's face turned pale. A week after the hearing, Elaine called me to her office after work. Her voice was steady, but there was something sharper behind it, like a blade waiting to be drawn. Patrick sent the supplemental audit results, she said as I walked in. And this time, it's not just sloppy reporting. It's intentional concealment. I sat down, my stomach tightening as she laid out the printed pages, documents showing GreenTech's financial transactions from the 3 years leading up to the divorce. He transferred over $120,000, 0 cents, into an account under a shell company, Northbridge Solutions LLC, based in Delaware, just 6 weeks before the divorce papers were filed. Elaine pointed to the detailed breakdown. I was stunned. What's Northbridge? Nothing, she replied. We looked into it. It has no employees, no business activity. It's just a placeholder, a place to hide funds, to lower the value of shared assets before the split. I clenched my fists. That was money I once believed was part of ours. Built from our effort. Our sleepless nights budgeting and marketing with my own credit cards. I never thought he'd quietly scrubbed the account before leaving me to walk into court looking like a freeloader. Patrick uncovered one more surprise. Buried deep in a mislabeled internal folder, likely hidden within the accounting system on purpose. It was a file titled 2015 Capital Advance Personal, clearly documenting an $18,750 0 cents transfer from my personal account to the company's, used to pay for the first equipment order with our supplier. That transaction was never disclosed in any of GreenTech's financial statements during the asset division. Do you remember making this transfer? Elaine asked. I nodded slowly. He said there was an issue with his bank. I pulled money from my savings so he could sign the contract early, and then I didn't think about it again. Elaine crossed her arms, her expression tightening. But he thought about it. And he recorded it. He just never shared it with anyone. That same afternoon, Elaine filed a motion to expand the financial investigation, attaching the newly collected evidence. The judge accepted the motion, and for the first time I saw him look at me with thoughtful eyes instead of detached indifference. He ordered Nathan's team to submit all financial records dating back to 2015, including correspondence with his personal financial advisors, within 7 days. At the next hearing, I was no longer the one being questioned, I was the one awaiting answers. Nathan arrived late, looking exhausted, his tie loose, dark circles under his eyes. His lawyers scrambled to organize papers as Elaine began presenting the new findings to the court. Your Honor, she began, we are not only outlining the concrete contributions my client made in building this company, but we are also presenting evidence that the defendant intentionally concealed marital assets by moving funds into an offshore account disguised as a shell company. The opposing side objected, but the judge ignored them and addressed Nathan directly. Mr. Dalton, he said, voice sharp, why was there a transfer from the company's account to Northbridge Solutions just 6 weeks before the divorce filing? Nathan stammered, I was advised that it was a reasonable way to manage cash flow. And the funds Mrs. Isabella transferred to the company in 2015. Did you acknowledge those? I don't quite remember. Elaine stepped forward and placed a thick document binder on the judge's bench. Then what is this? An internal company file clearly listing the transaction amount and sender as Isabella Reed. No further objections, just a long, heavy silence. The judge leaned back in his chair and set down his pen. The court will consider placing a temporary hold on Mr. Dalton's assets until the financial investigation is complete. Nathan lowered his head to the table, and for the first time in months, I exhaled, fully. News of our case spread faster than I expected. A local business publication ran a feature on the divorce lawsuit, referring to compelling evidence that shifted the entire course of a startup separation case. It didn't mention me by name, but anyone who knew GreenTech in its early days understood who the unofficial co-founder was. 3 days after the hearing, Elaine received a call from Nathan's attorney. They requested a private meeting, off the record. We agreed. The meeting took place in a quiet conference room on the 18th floor of a glass tower. Nathan was there with just his lawyer, both visibly uneasy. Elaine sat calmly beside me, composed as if she already knew exactly what would be said. We're offering a one-time payment of $780,000 0 cents, Nathan's lawyer began. In exchange, your client agrees to waive any co-founder claims and to keep the matter private. I didn't need to hear more. I turned to Elaine and gently shook my head. She understood immediately. No, she said firmly. My client is not looking for a payout in exchange for silence. She wants the truth formally recognized. That can't be bargained away. Nathan didn't look at me. For the first time he had nothing to argue, nothing to pretend. I remembered those nights when we folded flyers in our living room and he'd joked that someday he'd write a memoir and dedicate the first page to me. Now, when all I wanted was to have my name acknowledged, he tried to erase it. as if I never existed. 1 week later, the final ruling was issued. I was present in court alone this time. Elaine said I didn't need to be there, everything was already clear, but I knew I had to hear it with my own ears. I needed to hear the judge say the words I'd waited 3 years for. The court finds, the judge began, that Mrs. Isabella Reed made substantial, continuous and systematic contributions to the formation and growth of green tech. He looked up and straight at me. Although no formal ownership agreement existed, the evidence establishes her role as an unlisted co-founder, and therefore she is entitled to legal recognition. My chest felt like it finally opened up. Not from victory, but from finally no longer being a shadow in the story I helped write. The ruling included full reimbursement of the $72,000 0 cents in personal funds I had transferred from my savings account, along with an additional compensation equal to 28% of the company's value based on the audit report. An amount Elaine had demonstrated matched my operational role in the first 3 years. The court also ordered GreenTech's internal records to be amended to recognize me as one of the original founders, even though I no longer held any shares. I left the courthouse in silence, no reporters, no crowds, but my steps were lighter than ever. That day, when I returned home, there was an envelope on my doorstep. No name, just a handwritten note. I owe you an apology. Inside was a small letter. It was from Eliza, Nathan's former personal assistant. The same woman who had once smirked at me in court. I read the documents released by the court. I had no idea the truth had been so twisted. I'm sorry I believed the wrong story. And thank you for not staying silent. I folded the letter and tucked it into the drawer beside my desk, not because I needed the apology, but because I wanted to remember. When one person dares to speak up, another can find the courage to face the truth. A few weeks later, GreenTech quietly removed the entire Founders section from its official website. In the new About Us page, they listed individuals who laid the foundation of the company, and my name, Isabella Reed, appeared first. No fireworks, no celebration. Just one bolded line still and silent on the screen. And for me that was enough. Nearly a year after the ruling, I stood backstage at a conference center in Seattle, holding a stack of notes, my heart surprisingly calm. A young woman in a beige blazer walked over, smiled softly, and clipped a mic to my collar. "Ms. Isabella, you're on in 15 minutes, the whole room's excited." I nodded in thanks and turned to the mirror. Reflected back was a 39-year-old woman. No longer the forgotten assistant, no longer the wife behind someone else's company. It was me, a woman who had learned how to reclaim her voice, and now was sharing that strength with others. The conference theme that day, the forgotten voice, and how to reclaim it. As I walked onto the stage, the lights hit my eyes, but I didn't blink. I looked out at the audience, young women taking notes, middle-aged women leaning into each other, and even a few men nodding respectfully. No one knew my full story, but they came to hear the truth that too many had once ignored. I was once called irrelevant, unimportant, a burden, I began, my voice steady and clear. But the scariest thing isn't when others diminish you. It's when you start believing they're right. I spoke about my journey, from late-night contract writing to draining my savings account, from courtroom dismissals to the moment a judge read my name as a co-founder. I didn't aim to make anyone cry. I just wanted them to understand one thing. Silence is never the way to hold on to who you are. When I finished, the room rose in applause. A young woman came up and hugged me tightly. "I was about to leave my startup," she said, "because everyone said women don't belong, but thanks to you, I'm not walking away." That night I returned to my hotel, opened my laptop and stared at the words I had just typed. "Read and Rise Consulting, because your voice builds foundations." I hadn't decided to start a company just yet, but I knew this time the dream wouldn't be borrowed and my name would be the first one signed. 3 months later, I officially launched Read and Rise Consulting, a small but ambitious firm dedicated to helping women navigate startups, financial disputes, and the kinds of legal situations they once feared facing alone. My first client was a single mom named Danielle, whose ex-boyfriend had taken full control of the profits from the cafe they opened together. After hearing her story, I looked her in the eyes and said, "I've stood exactly where you are, and we're walking out of it together." And I didn't just work, I started writing. My pieces on invisible labor, uncredited intellectual ownership, and the importance of clear agreements from the start were shared thousands of times. A small business journal called me the woman redefining unofficial contributions in startups. I didn't give interviews, I just kept going, quietly, because I knew it wasn't my name that needed to be heard, it was the lived experiences of thousands of women who had been erased from the dreams they helped build. One late autumn afternoon, I returned to my office after signing a new project and found a bouquet on my desk. No card, just a small handwritten note. Thank you for not staying silent, for going first and clearing a path for those still afraid to stand. JM. I didn't know who JM was, but I smiled. Because I understood sometimes the biggest win doesn't happen in court. It happens when your story becomes the reason someone else starts theirs. On a winter afternoon, while I was editing a presentation for an upcoming seminar in Denver, Elaine called. "You're not going to believe what just happened," she said, her tone playful. I put her on speaker while still typing. "You know, I've learned not to be surprised anymore." "Well then, what if I told you? Nathan just resigned as CEO of Green Tech." I froze. For a moment the room felt still, like sound itself had disappeared. "Official reason is personal stress and a desire to focus on himself," Elaine continued. "But word is the board's internal audit and extra financial reviews had a lot to do with it." I didn't feel triumphant. Honestly. I just sat there, watching the soft light stream through the white curtain, and felt something deep. Not victory, but closure. I never wanted him to fall. I just wanted to be acknowledged for being there. And now, I didn't need words to prove it. The action spoke louder. From a company that once denied my role, to hundreds of messages filling the inbox at Read and Rise. One of them was from Juliet, a schoolteacher in Wisconsin. She wrote, "I used to think I shouldn't ask for anything because people told me I was just a wife. But after reading your article on invisible contributions, I spoke up when my husband tried to sell our home without asking." Your lawyer was right. When one person speaks, others find the courage to live honestly. I printed that letter and pinned it beside my desk, not out of pride, but to remind myself. This path I walked wasn't just for me. Every time I share my story, someone asks, "Do you ever regret not speaking up sooner?" And I always answer honestly, yes, but I'd regret it more if I had stayed silent forever. I used to think my worth only existed if someone else acknowledged it, but in the end, I realized it was never gone. It had just been buried under raised eyebrows, dismissive looks, and sweet words meant to keep me behind the curtain. And I, out of love, out of trust, out of fear of conflict, once accepted that. Not anymore. Because the truth, no matter how long it's buried, rises like spring water from the earth. I didn't write a book. I didn't want to be anyone's role model. I just told a story many women have lived, but never dared to say out loud. I never mentioned Nathan by name in any of my talks. Not out of avoidance, but because I knew people wouldn't remember me for who denied me, they'd remember me for choosing not to deny myself. Near the end of the year, I returned to the old house in North Portland, the one Nathan and I lived in during our early years. The new owners had remodeled most of it, but the white fence was still there. I stood at the gate for a long time. I didn't knock. I just looked. I used to think that place was my ending. Now I understand, it was just a pause. On the drive home, I rolled down the window. The wind was cold but calming. I smiled. No more bitterness, just release. I know I can't turn back time, but I can keep moving forward, day by day, with the belief that my voice has weight, and the truth I held on to was never meaningless. Some wounds never heal the way people expect, but some scars, when acknowledged, become badges. And I carry mine not to show off but to remind myself. I walked out of the shadows, not with hatred, but with the light I made for myself. Isabella's story is proof of a truth that never changes. Real worth doesn't lie in titles or outside recognition. It lies in one's conviction and belief in themselves. Despite being dismissed, overlooked, or erased, she chose to rise. Not for revenge, but to reclaim her voice and dignity. In a world where silence was once considered safe, Isabella showed that sometimes speaking up is what opens the door to true freedom. What do you think of Isabella's journey?